morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing well this fine Wednesday. It's beautiful outside. After this live stream, I'm going to go and listen to today's testimony out in my back garden. I think I might even get a sun lounger out. First time this year, I'm going to get to use my sun lounger, maybe. Who knows? Hello, CW, Angie Baby, McKenna, Lisa, Jackie, Robin, Dawn, Kimberly, and Leah, you early birds in the chat. Welcome, everybody. So, this is trial recap of day 10, yesterday's testimony. So, I thought, honestly, it was a solid day for the prosecution. After the absolute clown got off the stand, Lieutenant Gallagher from Canton PD, once he got off the stand, I think it really was a solid day for the prosecution. I really do. And, you know, I happen to believe that Karen Reid is innocent. I do. So they've not done enough to move my dial anywhere. But thinking about it from a jurist perspective, who's listening to all of this for the first time, doesn't have the benefit of being able to go back to trial 1 to listen to testimony there. Oh, and because they finished early yesterday, I mean, they finish early every day, like 4 p.m. Judge Bev needs to go home at 4, but they finished extra early. So I listened to Brian Albert's testimony from trial 1 for the cross-examination. I listened to that yesterday, which I thought was really interesting. But, you know, I can't get over the fact that the injuries John O'Keefe had are just not consistent with a motor vehicle collision. That's my sticking point. I can't move past that. So the prosecution, to move my dial anywhere, they're going to have to explain in a realistic fashion how John O'Keefe came to die on that lawn, having been struck in the right arm by Karen Reid's Lexus. At the very least, you would think if he'd been sideswiped in the right arm, he'd have a broken elbow, he'd have a dislocated shoulder. I don't understand. I don't. So I'm trying to think objectively. I'm trying to think like a juror would, listening to this testimony for the first time. And once Gallagher got off the stand, I really do think that there was some testimony there that would be very convincing, or at least thought-provoking to the jury. So we're going to go through the day, and I'm going to pull out just a handful of clips. We're going to start with Gallagher. So if you watched my trial recap from yesterday, you'll know that I had a lot of laughing. It's just so funny. The leaf blower and the red solo cups. I mean, come on. Him thinking that it's wonderful that he had this really inventive way of collecting evidence from a snowy lawn. Now, by the end of the day, we got to hear about how the search was done properly when the Massachusetts State Police did a search of the lawn and found some taillight pieces. Now, we'll get there. We'll get there because it's the timing of all this is very important. But Gallagher thought that, oh, if he doesn't leaf blow this area, he's going to lose it all. So let's play this a few minutes from the from the cross-examination, and this is Attorney Alan Jackson, who is showing Gallagher pictures from the Sally Port. So the Sally Port is where they took Karen Reid's Lexus. So they impounded the Lexus on the 29th of January, so the same day, but later on in the day. It got to the Sally Port at 5:35. It was booked in to the Sally Port at 5:35. But when the handover was made between the red solo cups in the stop and shop bag, when that handover was done between Gallagher and the criminalist, weirdly, they took the cups down to the Sally port. I mean, it's just so bizarre, so bizarre. So let's listen to what Attorney Jackson says to Gallagher about this evidence transfer. It's just crazy.
Do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes, based on the location of the vehicle, the broken taillight, I believe that's Miss Reed's vehicle.
And do you know when this photograph was taken?
I do not.
Do you believe it was taken between January 29th and February 1st?
Yes.
But you don't know when it was taken?
No, I don't have personal knowledge, no.
I just want to draw your attention very briefly, just to orient us to this area on the bottom right-hand corner. Do you see that, what looks like a white rag on the ground?
Yes, based on the pictures, I think it might be a paper towel, but yes.
Okay. If we could look at the next photograph, which is 55, looks like a paper bag.
Oh, and I did mean to say, if my internet starts playing up, let me know. If it starts to get wonky, let me know, because I'm uploading a video at the same time. So there's a video upload going on in the background. So my internet gets stretched thin, because my internet's not great anyway, because I live out in the sticks. So if it does start getting shaky and blurry and silly, let me know, because I can turn off my other screen, and that does help a little bit. So just let me know. It's fine for now, I think.
Do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes.
What is that?
That's the Stop and Shop bag that contained the 6 samples.
Do you see the rag in that photograph as well?
Yeah, we could call it agree to call it a rag or
you think it's a paper towel?
I'm not sure. It looks like a paper towel on the picture in the picture.
Well,
it's a white
that's
object,
the
yeah.
word.
For all I care, the white thing, that's
yes.
fine. All right. And do you see that that's next to a tire just at the top of the picture, just for orientation purposes?
Yeah, it appears to be 18 to 2 feet, 18 inches to 24 inches behind the tire, yes.
Okay. And that, of course, is the tire of the SUV.
Yes, I would think so.
So that would be the right rear of the SUV, just a few inches from this bag, correct?
It would be a couple of feet from the bag, yes.
Okay. If we could take a look at the next photograph. This is Exhibit 56 for the record. What's depicted inside the bag?
The red Solo cups.
And you still see the rag in the
I mean,
photograph.
look at that. Look at that. So this is at some point between January 29th and February 1st. So we haven't got an even specific day when this was handed over. So this is what Gallagher collected using his leaf blower. Went across the road to a colleague's house, his boss, who gave him 6 Solo cups to put evidence in. They're open. And then he puts them in a Stop and Shop bag that he doesn't even know where the Stop and Shop bag came from, like someone's vehicle. Probably had like someone's lunch in it or something. Who knows? So the criminalist from the state lab who picked this up, what on earth must they have thought? I mean, why are you even wearing gloves at this point? Because these cups have been exposed to all sorts of contaminants. I mean, there's blood in there sloshing around. Insane. And why was the transfer done in the Sally port, 2 feet away from Karen Reed's Lexus? This is breeding ground for cross-contamination. But my concern is, I can say this, you can think this as well, because it's obvious, but we are true crime aficionados. We are people who watch this stuff a lot. We are people who have got more knowledge than the average person. Not necessarily because we've done any, schooling on this or anything like that, anything formal. I mean, some of you may have. But it's common sense. If you're used to listening to cases, watching cases, and you know how evidence collection should be done, I'm concerned that the jury is not fully and appreciating just how easy cross-contamination in an environment like that would be. And the fact that Judge Bev has disallowed the defence from bringing their expert on who would talk about proper police investigations, it's a worry. It's a real worry.
I sure do, yes.
So the SUV would be right here, correct? At the top of the left.
Well, I can't see the top of it. It would be, it's nearby, yes.
Okay. And it's not just nearby, it's the right rear of the SUV that's nearby, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
that comes important. Like, we've not got there yet in the trial, but we know that it's the right rear where the taillight was broken, and there's apparently some DNA found on the back of Karen's Lexus in that vicinity. So what the defence is setting up here is the possibility for cross-contamination from John O'Keefe's blood onto the Lexus.
Photograph. This is Exhibit 57 for the record. What is inside that? What's depicted inside that bag?
The red solo cups with coagulated blood.
And these are the only, we can have the lights, please. And so if you take that down. These are the only photographs that we have or that you've ever seen of those red solo cups, that Stop and Shop bag, and the biological material in those red solo cups.
The only ones I have seen, yes.
And those photographs that you see are within 2.5 feet from the right rear of that SUV, correct?
So those are the only photographs. So we don't know. Gallagher can say, oh, they were put in a fridge in temporary evidence. We don't know who's got access to that fridge, that temporary evidence locker, whatever it is. We've got no knowledge of any of that. And we've only got Gallagher's word that this stuff was even put in a fridge. So it's untestable. What on earth the criminalist would have thought, I have no idea. But this is supposedly the photos that show the chain of custody moving from Canton PD to the crime lab. Insane. Absolutely insane.
Approximately, yes.
And the right rear of that SUV houses the taillight material, correct? Or the
taillight area, yes.
The cups were not sealed, correct?
The cups were not sealed.
The bag was not sealed, was it?
As far as I know, what do you mean by sealed?
Yesterday, you brought a box in. Remember that?
Yes.
What do you mean by sealed? What do you mean by sealed? My God.
That box had tape on it.
That's correct.
What color was the tape?
Red.
Why is the tape red?
It can be red. It can be blue. I mean, evidence tape is different colors.
Normally, in your experience, red evidence tape is used to formally seal evidence bags or evidence containers, correct?
Yes.
That's because it highlights to the eye a visual cue. Hey, that's important. It's been sealed. It's got bright red tape on it, correct?
Correct.
Oftentimes, that tape has additional information on it as well, correct?
You could have initials on it of who put the tape on, yes.
Right. In other words, it might say evidence, correct? It might be pre-printed.
Yes, correct.
And it may have a place for initials to be.
Correct.
And one of the reasons that you initial it is because of that. If someone takes a razor blade and cuts through, or a knife and cuts through that tape, those initials are cut through. It has to be retaped and reinitialed, correct?
That is correct.
That is a basic protocol for chain of custody, is it not?
Yes.
You see, Attorney Jackson can be schooling the jury here on what proper evidence collection and storage should look like. But for jurors who are already kind of getting in their head that Karen's guilty and are less inclined to believe the defense, they're not going to listen to Attorney Jackson's explanation, even though what he's saying is absolutely correct. They're not going to listen to that because he's an attorney, and we know he told right from the jump in a trial that attorneys are not giving evidence. So what the attorneys are doing is just asking questions. They're not to be used for evidence. So unless the defense have an expert on the stand telling the jury this, the jury can just disregard everything that Attorney Jackson is saying here.
And that's to maintain the care, custody, and control and the integrity over the items and the items inside the evidence container, whatever they may be.
That's correct.
Whether they are biological material, physical items of evidence, a document, whatever.
Correct.
None of that was done with what we just saw, correct?
Correct.
We've agreed already that the blood was stored in non-sterile solo cups, correct?
Correct.
We've agreed that those cups were not sealed. The cups themselves were not sealed. There was no cap. There was no plastic, plasticine, saran wrap, nothing put over the cups, correct?
That is correct.
So they were open.
Yes,
They were not in an evidence bag. They were in a grocery bag, correct?
they were. Yes.
Yesterday on direct examination, it may have been on cross-examination, Mr. Gallagher, I don't remember. You said, I have no idea where Sergeant Lang got that grocery bag, correct?
I don't know where the bag came from, no.
Could have come out of the back of his car seat, correct?
I'm assuming it came out of one of the cars, yes.
No idea what had been in that bag previous to those cups with blood being in the bag,
I
correct?
have no personal knowledge.
Do officers not carry a few evidence collection materials in their vehicle? They should do. You would think so. However, Gallagher wasn't in his police car. He went to the scene in his own truck because of the snow. He thought his own vehicle was better suited because it was bigger and a four-wheel drive. So I understand that. I do. I understand why he used his personal vehicle that morning. But as I said yesterday, he went to Camden PD before he went to the scene. So he went from his house, got confused and thought the scene was at One Meadows, John O'Keefe's house, went to Canton PD to get some winter gear, like a high-vis coat, but didn't bother to pick up anything else. So he was at Canton PD. He knows he's going to a scene. He knows he's in his personal vehicle. He should have picked up some material, basic materials, right there, but he didn't. That's why they had to improvise.
Was that?
And obviously that bag, it goes without saying, is not a forensically sterile item either, correct?
Most bags are not sterilized.
And not only the cups were not sealed, the bag that the cups were in.
No. All right. An evidence bag, single-use evidence bag. Yeah, it's not completely sterile. It's not like sterile of all bacteria and everything. But the reason why evidence bags are used, like single-use evidence bags are used, is that nothing else has been in that bag previous.
Was not sealed.
They were only closed, correct.
You will agree that having unsealed and unsecured biological material, specifically blood material, situated right next to the right rear quarter panel of that SUV would not be within normal protocols for securing evidence, correct?
This was in the hands of a criminalist. It was an exchange of custody. I don't have any issue with it.
You don't know.
It doesn't have any issue with. It's not a proper exchange of custody. There's nobody signing for it. There's unsealed biological materials, and they're doing it in the Sally port, in the garage, basically the garage in Canton PD. Why?
You have no personal knowledge of where that bag had been or where the cups had been previous to that photograph being taken.
Correct.
You'll agree that having unsealed and unsecured blood right next to the right rear of the SUV is a recipe for cross-contamination, wouldn't you?
Not in the hands of a trained criminalist, I wouldn't know.
Well, generally speaking.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the hands of a trained criminalist. You put it in the Sally port to hand it over to the criminalist. It was only in the criminalist's hands after it had been handed over. What Attorney Jackson is getting at is that anything could have happened beforehand.
There were other people there that weren't the trained criminalists, right?
There was a photographer who took the pictures.
Who's not a trained criminalist.
Correct. But the cups weren't in his hands. It was in the criminalist's hands. Those are the criminalist's hands you see gloved in that photo.
That's not my question. My question is, there was unsealed blood and in an unsealed bag for how much time, you don't know, sitting right there by the right rear of that SUV, correct?
No, I do know.
How do you know?
Because I'm the one that brought the bag with the criminalist to that area. They photographed it, documented it, and then they transferred it to their plastic containers.
And before you grabbed that bag,
So they transferred it to their plastic containers in the Sally port. Could they not go to a more hygienic location? So the criminalist transferred this to their own containers in the Sally port. Great, fantastic. Well done, well done. But again, it sounds ludicrous to us who are used to this stuff, who know how evidence collection and transfer of custody should happen. But in the jury's mind, I don't know whether all of them would be able to pick up on this nuance. But solid points there from Attorney Jackson, but I think probably Hank Brennan probably regretted having to bring Gallagher to testify, but he had to bring Gallagher. He had to, because Gallagher found the cocktail glass. So he had to. I don't think he would have brought Gallagher to testify if Gallagher was just one of the people on the scene. You know, they wouldn't have even mentioned the leaf blower. They wouldn't. They would not have mentioned the red Solo cups if Gallagher hadn't found the remains of the supposed cocktail glass. So Hank Brennan, for the rest of the day, though, I think pulled it back. I have to say, pulled it back. And he played a couple of clips. This is just before lunch. So he plays these clips, and I hate the fact that he's been allowed to play these clips. I really do. And I've said it before. I'm sure I'll say it again. This is really damaging for Karen. These clips are from media interviews that she's done, and they are really damaging because he's playing them out of context. Why he's been allowed to do this, I've got no idea, but Karen has been her own worst enemy with the media she's done, because it's out there in the public domain and Hank Brennan has been allowed to use it. So he plays a couple of clips just before lunch. So the jury have got 45 minutes where they can clear their mind, they can be eating, they can be mulling over the testimony. And the last thing they hear before lunch is these two clips. So very damaging for Karen, these two clips, in my opinion.
The Commonwealth moves into evidence and asks to play clip 18.
Okay.
So when John got out of the car at Brian Albert's house, he took my full vodka soda, which is sitting in the cup holder.
Thank you.
So when John got out of the car, he took Karen's glass that she brought. She carried it from CF McCarthy's and had been walking about with it in the waterfall. So putting her drinks in the same glass. And they took it with them. Is that not theft? You're taking a glass from McCarthy's to Waterfall. Now you brought it home with you. Then again, you know, they're all drinking, driving. They just do what they're doing what they want. All right, doing what they want. A bunch of police officers just doing what they want. So, given that, we've got this witness on the stand who's been on the stand for quite some time, who found the cocktail glass in the snow. And now we've got Karen saying that when John got out of the car, he was holding Karen's glass. Now, we don't know. We have absolutely no idea whether what was found in the snow is the same glass that John O'Keefe was holding when he got out of the vehicle. We've no idea where that glass came from. But in the jury's mind, what I'm talking about here is perception. In the jury's mind, they're only listening to all this stuff once. They don't have the ability to play it back, to replay, to look at trial recaps. They're listening to everything once. They're making notes and making, you know, mental observations. And 2 and 2 can make 4, can't it, in those circumstances? He plays another clip as well.
Comment? Thank you.
All right, your next witness.
One more, please, Your Honor. The Commonwealth moves into evidence and seeks to play clip number 17, please.
Okay.
I gave an interview with ABC with Matt Gutman. I think this was whom I gave the interview to, and I said, he asked, why was I saying, could I hit him? Did I hit him? And I said, yeah, my first thought was, I've been out late, I've been drinking, and he's in the general vicinity of where I last saw him. I mean, they talk about the left side of the property and the right as if it's, Hammersmith Farms. It's a postage stamp. It's 50 feet. So he's in the front yard to the left of the front door, and no one's coming out of the house. Jen's telling me nobody's seen him. So I'm thinking, Jesus, was I starting to pull away and I ran over his foot? Like, he's roughly where I left him. So yeah, when I found him, I was thinking, did I clip him somehow?
No, that really is out of context. That's explaining why witnesses might have thought that she said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. What she was actually saying is, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? Like, she was questioning, she was panicking, she was out of her mind. But playing that clip out of context, where Karen herself, out of her own mouth, says that, yes, she's been drinking, and they found John in the place where she dropped him off. That's bad. That is bad. That is really bad. Again, it's about perception. So, yeah, I don't like it. I really don't like it. All right, we're moving on now to the text messages. So we had, I'm not going to play the weather guy. So we had the weather guy on, Robert Gilman, meteorologist. It was very dry. Look, he was on the stand a long time. I think he could have said what he needed to say in much less time. I don't think he moves the dial either way. I enjoyed the cross-examination by Alessi. Gilman, he was a little bit, what's the word? A little bit guarded, a little bit defensive under cross-examination. But Alessi was making some really good points, and it's interesting to know that there was actually only about an inch of snow up until about 3 a.m. So the blizzard really didn't pick up until the morning. Yes, it was cold. Yes, the ground was frozen, which is one of the points that the prosecution need the jury to hear, that the ground was frozen. Therefore, this massive fractured skull he had was because his head hit the ground or whatever. But there was only a very thin layer of snow. If John had been hit by Karen, then he would have been on the ground. There was very little snow, like at 12:30, very little snow. Like it was just just beginning, just a thin covering. It was just starting to stick. And so therefore the cocktail glass and the tail light pieces, if indeed this was, as the prosecution says, would have been at ground level. So there's about an inch up to about 3 a.m. And then by 6 a.m., I think there was 3 point something inches. And then a whole bunch of snow fell later that day. And then by the time they did the grid search that evening, there was a lot of snow, like a lot of snow. So that was interesting, but I'm not going to play any of it. Here's Garino back. So this is the guy who read the text messages the other day between Karen and John, which I don't think are a problem for Karen. Those text messages throughout the 28th, I did a video on that. They certainly don't give a motive for murder. And these messages, so he goes through Karen's phone history from 12:33 all the way up to the morning. And I guess this is supposedly to make Karen sound like an insane woman, like she's deranged, like she doesn't know what she's saying. and she's calling John names. She says she hates him. She calls him a pervert. But actually, I'm going to play these. And actually, I don't think this is really as damaging for the prosecution as for the defense as the prosecution thinks it is. Because what this does tell me, Karen absolutely did not believe John was dead. So if the defense can take a positive from this, you know, it makes Karen look bad. It does make her look like an insane person. It does make her look bad. However, what I think it does to astute jurors is moves them away from the second degree murder, because the second degree murder, she had to do it with intent. But it's clear here she thinks John is out sleeping with another woman. She thinks John is just like stringing her along and he's spending the night with another woman. That's what's on her mind. That's what she's so worried about. Not that she's killed him and that she's trying to cover it up. I mean, you could say, well, she's a very good actress, but she would have to be a really good actress. But she thinks that he is sleeping around. That's what's on her mind. That's why she's insanely calling him. She's trying to get his attention. She's trying to get him home, telling him that she's gone home and the kids are on their own. She's trying to get him home because she thinks he's off with someone else. He's alley-catting with someone else. And therefore, to an astute juror, surely they're going to say, well, she doesn't think he's dead. So if she killed him, she didn't know about it. It was an accident. It was an accident. Therefore, they have to move down from murder to manslaughter and look at the various manslaughter charges. It's still bad. It is still bad, and I still do have a bad feeling. I do feel Karen is in great threat here of being found guilty of manslaughter. But I will be absolutely shocked, really shocked, if they found her guilty of murder. But let's listen.
John, it's not answered. 12:34:38 a.m. The defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:35:09 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 12:35:35. The defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:36:09 a.m. The defendant calls John. It's not answered.
Trooper Green, let me stop you there for a second.
Mhm.
Did you look into any internet connection between the defendant's phone and the router and the internet connection at Meadows Ave, John O'Keefe's home that night?
Yes. 12:36:39 a.m. The defendant's phone auto connects to the Wi-Fi HatsFam 123.
Are you familiar?
All right, so we already knew, like from trial one, that Karen's phone connects with John O'Keefe's Wi-Fi at 1 Meadows Ave. So that's at 12:36 and 39 seconds. So it's about a 6-minute drive. Let me just check. I have done this on a previous video, but I'm gonna do it again. So 34 Fairview to 1 Meadows Ave. All right, here we go. 6 minutes. 6 minutes, the straightforward route. 8 minutes, a slightly longer route. Now, remember, Karen isn't familiar with the roads in Canton. She's not from Canton. They struggled to get from the waterfall to 34 Fairview. They had to get directions from Jen McCabe. So the chances of her being able to go there in 6 minutes, I mean, yeah, it's possible, but I think it probably took her a little bit longer than 6 minutes because she's probably going to be going slower. Like, you know, if you're driving and you know the roads really well and you can anticipate every turn and, you know, you just know the roads so well, you can get there faster. But if it's an unfamiliar route, it's dark, then 6 minutes. Look, if she got there in 6 minutes, she'd had to have left 34 Fairview at 12:30. Now, they're saying, the prosecution are saying, that John O'Keefe, the collision happened 12:31 to the shade of 12:32. Well, Karen should have already set off. So that's a big problem for the prosecution. The timeline is a massive problem because Karen had to be in the vicinity of 1 Meadows Ave to connect with his Wi-Fi at 12:36 and 39 seconds. She had to have set off by 12:30, at least 12:30, at the latest 12:30. That's a problem for the prosecution. But can the jury put that together? Can the jury work that out? All that data that was presented about John O'Keefe's phone and the Waze app, and they had a very, very strong timeline, like minute by minute timeline. It's a problem when you consider that Karen had to be at 1 Meadows Ave at 12:36. So just bear that in mind. Just bear that in mind. Sorry, guys.
Again, when you pull into 29, 2022.
I didn't.
So depending on the router, it's either a 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz radio band or signal band, I should say. Depending on which one it's connecting to, which band, it's either 150-foot indoor range or up to 300 feet outdoor. So again, when you pull into your home, sometimes you can still be connected to your home Wi-Fi in the driveway.
And again, can you give us the time of the connection between the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's router at Meadows Ave that night?
Yes, 12:36:39 a.m.
Please continue.
At 12:36:40 a.m., the defendant calls John.
So while she's driving, she's calling him. Like 12:33, 12:34, 12:35, 12:36. She's calling him every few seconds on her way to John's. So at this call, this is where she connects with the Wi-Fi. So she's within 100 to 300 feet from John's house when she connects. So again, she had to have left 34 Fairview at the very latest at 12:30. So that's a problem for the prosecution.
It's not answered. At 12:37:08 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 1 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman, would you kindly play the voicemail for 12:37:08?
At 12:38:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:03 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:40:43 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:41:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 2 is left. Some beeping noises, appears to be a butt dial or accidental call.
Ms. Gilman, could you play?
Oh, butt dial. Well, Jennifer McCabe knows all about butt dials.
The voice message at 12:41:35.
She sounds like she's walking about on like a wooden floor. I don't know what the whistling was.
The defendant then texts John O'Keefe at 12:55:31 a.m. on the 29th, "I'm going home." The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "See you later" at 12:55:50 a.m. on the 29th. At 12:58:19 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered.
Yeah, that's a good point. Funny that her butt dial went to voicemail, but none of the McAlbert's butt dials did. Exactly. It's really difficult to butt dial on an iPhone. It really is difficult. Like in the old days. Do you remember like the old Nokia phones where you had like buttons, like proper buttons? I was always calling people by accident. Oh, I did it a lot because I used to just stuff the phone in my pocket or my bag, and you had to remember to lock it. It like didn't lock automatically, and I was always calling people. And people were calling me. It was a thing. But iPhones, it's really hard nowadays. I mean, it's possible. It is possible to do it. Like if you've not locked your phone and you just stick your phone in your pocket, and it's possible. But it's I don't know. There just seems to be way too much butt dialing going on. I mean, these people, though, they're all drunk. They don't know what they're doing, do they? A home alarm system. It could be. That you would have to unlock the phone, yeah, to butt dial. Especially these days where your phone is open with facial ID. So, you have to put either a 6-digit code in or use your face. So, yeah, your phone would have to be unlocked to be able to do it. You don't have any chance of doing it. I used to like the old Nokia phones, though. And they hardly ever ran out of charge. Like, the batteries on them were amazing.
12:58:47 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:59:24 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
Let's go.
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you want, you fucking pervert.
Dear me, you effing pervert. Oh no, you effing pervert. She thinks he's with another girl. That's what she thinks. It's obvious that all this attention seeking, like this insane ringing, like every few seconds, is because, she knows he's not turned his phone off. So she's going to cause maximum disruption to his shagfest.
At 1 a.m. 26 seconds, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1 a.m. 49 seconds, the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 4 is left. It's 1 second call, no sound.
It's coming.
That was it.
Your kids are cooking alone.
The defendant texts John O'Keefe. Your kids are cucking alone at 1:02 a.m. on the 29th.
No one heard his phone ringing on the lawn. No, it could have been on silent. It could have had do not disturb on. Like my phone goes on to do not disturb automatically at 7 p.m. because I don't expect any civilized person to ring me after 7 p.m. So between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., you ain't ever going to get an answer from me. Not that I answer my phone a lot anyway, but you ain't ever going to get an answer from me because I have do not disturb on. So his phone could have had do not disturb on. Like just, automatically. Comes on every night.
Defendant texts John O'Keefe. I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone. 1:04:14 a.m. on the 29th.
Well, we know that's not true. She didn't go back to Mansfield. So she's trying to get him to come back by saying that the kids are alone, obviously.
At 1:10:17 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
I think this is the bad one.
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
Oh dear.
At 1:10:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1:12:18 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:12:46 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:13:13 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. Sorry. At 1:14:11 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I'm going home. I cannot see your niece. I need to go home. You're fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Kim's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
Oh dear. Oh dear. So look, it sounds insane. It is insane. She does stop. She does stop for a little while. Like we've got a reprieve here, and then it all starts again. So obviously she's fallen asleep. It all starts again at 4:38, and this is when she starts. She's panicking, and I think she calls Kerry and Jen. I think it's like 4:53, was it? Something like that. But this is what the guilters are saying. I'm just picked this one as one example of what the guilters think about this this texting. And the reason why I'm showing this is that this could possibly be how some jurors look at it. So John O'Keefe, I effing hate you. 12:37. Just 5 minutes after allegedly striking John with her car while drunk with a BAC between .114 and 128. John, it's 1 a.m. I'm with your effing niece and nephew. You're a pervert. You're an effing pervert. You're effing another girl. You're an effing loser. F yourself. So, look, even if he was dying on the lawn, she clearly didn't know that. I think this is evidence that she did not know she'd done it, if she did indeed do it. And as I said, I don't personally believe she did, because I can't see the injuries to John O'Keefe's body being caused by a motor vehicle collision. At the very least, he would have had a broken elbow and a dislocated shoulder. But he didn't. Jurors in John O'Keefe and Karen Reid retrial have just heard a shocking series of voicemails from Karen Reid to John O'Keefe in the moments after Reid is alleged to have hit John while drunk with her car and then left John to die in a blizzard alone on a lawn with a head injury. Then jurors heard a 5:23 a.m. and we're going to listen to this in a minute. I don't hear this, but I know some people heard this. So at 5:23, she says, John, is that you? And there's no speculation that Karen went to 34 Fairview before Jen and Kerry, right, before all that palaver. I don't believe this happened, but this is what some people are saying. The very moment it's believed Karen returned to the scene of her crime to confirm John was dead before leaving again to go and collect 2 witnesses. Was there enough time for that, though? I mean, potentially. But if she's on the phone, like she's returning to the scene of a crime, because she's sober now, returning to the scene of a crime, well, nearly sober, more sober, you're not going to have your phone on saying, John, is that you? If you're looking at a dead body on the lawn. So this speculation that's going round, I don't believe it. She called John nearly 40 times in the hours between 12:32 and after 6 a.m. Those clips were the very last thing jurors heard before the 45-minute lunch break. Hank Brennan, listen to this. Hank Brennan is a legal magician. He's magisterial. He's the Lionel Messi of the courtroom. Tell friends, mark my word. Dear me. Oh, don't. Oh, don't. I mean, look, Hank Brennan is better than Lally. And it's always more difficult for the defense on a retrial. The prosecution has the upper hand on a retrial. They really do. It doesn't bode well. It really doesn't. All right, let's go back to this.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:39:39 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:40:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:54 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:04:27 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:28 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:58 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:23:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
Right, listen to this. I think she says, John, where are you? I don't think she says, is that you? I think she says, where are you? Listen to it again, if I can get it. Oh, that's too far. I hate doing it like this. No, that's... I'll do it from there.
Not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:04:27 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:28 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered.
Right, listen to this in a minute.
5:21:58 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:23:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
I think she says, John, where are you? Or John, where the F are you? I don't think she says, John, is that you? But again, it's up to the jurors. The jurors only get to hear this once, though. They don't get to do a replay. They can possibly, during deliberations, they may allow them to listen to all of these. So they may be able to listen to this at their leisure during deliberations. But during the court, though, one time and one time only.
At 5:24:27 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:25:28 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:26:14 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:16 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:43 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:46 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:15 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:52 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:31:21 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 5:36:29 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 6:03:02 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 8 is left with some voice and noise and background.
Right, this is the last one, and this is a long one. Now, they would have been at the scene at this point. So 6:03, I think what we're hearing is them at the scene. Because wasn't 911 called at 6:04? I'm going to have to go back and actually put all these different times in some kind of chronological order, because I'm starting to lose all the different timings. But I think they're at the scene here. And you can hear like screaming, and you can't make out too many words. but they're at the scene. So she's calling him and she doesn't turn the phone off. So it goes to voicemail, and this is basically recorded them at the scene. Listen, it goes on a few minutes until the voicemail cuts off.
Ms. Gilman, could you play that, please?
Yes, I need someone to 34 beautiful Vietnam living in no.
Yeah, it is. That's Jen McCabe. That's Jen McCabe at the on 911. That's Jen McCabe calling 911. Karen has her phone connected to John O'Keefe's voicemail.
I know. Where's the blanket? I don't see the blanket, Terry. Yes, I need
Yeah, that noise, it's wipers. Yeah. So the phone's in the car. Jen saying there's a man passed out in the snow, yeah. Yeah. Karen did hit another car. She nudged John O'Keefe's car coming out when she was going to pick Jen and Kerry up. So we know she hit another car. We know she did. So she's going, Kerry. Jen. I wonder whether the jurors are able to put this together, that this is them at the scene. Those that have been writing down all the times will know this. Voicemail and McCabe's 911 are 60302. So this is this call, and 60347. Yeah, so yeah, it's the 911. Which you can hear Jen in the background. I know, it's a little bit unbelievable, isn't it? That all the people left the house and no one saw him on the lawn, especially as we now know from the meteorologist, that only 1 inch of snow had fallen by 3 a.m. So it's not like he was buried in snow. And most of these people left before 2. So you're only going to have a very small, like, film of snow. And if John O'Keefe was dead on the lawn, that snow would quickly melt off his body, because even if he's dead, he's going to still have body heat. Like, your body cools down. I'm waiting for the medical stuff to talk about this. But when you die, your body loses body heat at a very predictable rate per hour. And I can never remember what it is, so I'm going to look it up. How quickly does a body cool down after death? Okay, AI is right. AI is right. I remember 1.5, but I can never remember whether it's 1.5C or 1.5F. So human body cools down after death through a process called alga mortis, with the rate depending on factors like the ambient temperature and the body's initial temperature. Generally, the body cools down by about 1.5F or 0.84C per hour during the first few hours after death. It takes about 12 hours for the body to feel cool to the touch, and 12 hours for it to cool, 24 hours for it to cool to the core. Now, it's arguably going to cool down a little bit faster if the temperature is really cold. But if John O'Keefe, let's go with the prosecution's theory. Let's imagine John O'Keefe dies shortly after 12:32. By 2:30, that's only 2 hours. Right, they're all left by then, because Jen McCabe's at home making the How's Long to Die in the cold text. So they're all home by 2:30, so they've all left. John's body will have only cooled down by about 3 degrees. Let's give it a 4 degrees, because it's really cold, so it might cool down a little bit faster. So the snow that falls on John O'Keefe's body is going to melt, because his body is still going to be warm. So you can't say that he was covered in snow. That snow, a small film of snow, would have been able to melt off his body. So the meteorologist actually works for the defense as well as it does for the prosecution. It works for both sides. So it is informative to know this stuff. I was very interested to know that there was only 1 inch by 3 a.m. And I'll talk more about this, and maybe they'll talk about it. Maybe the medical people will talk about it. But they should be able to get, based on John's body temperature when he was found, they should be able to get a rough time of death. In the first 12 hours, you can get it's only a rough time of death based on body temperature. If they've had to... if they've actually, they would have taken his body temperature, because they were warming him up. They were warming him up so that they could declare him dead. So yes, they absolutely knew his body temperature. Like, they were monitoring his body temperature. So they should know it's a rough time of death. All right, let's move on, because that's nearly over. Let's move on to the proper search that was done. And I do think this is damaging for the defense. So this guy, Kevin O'Hara, he's from the Massachusetts State Police, and they were called in the afternoon to put a team together to search the lawn of 34 Fairview Road for pieces of taillight, because it became known that Karen Reid's taillight was broken. Who told them? Jen McCabe. So after they found out that Karen Reid's taillight was broken, they got a warrant to impound Karen Reid's car. Karen Reid's car was at Karen Reid's parents' house by this time. So they went to Karen Reid's parents' house to load the vehicle, the Lexus, onto a loader, and they took it to the Canton PD for safe storage in the Sallyport. It got to the Sallyport about 5:35. This search was happening at around the same time. So they managed to cobble together 7 people who did a grid search, so a step-by-step methodical search of the lawn using proper tools. So are you listening, Lieutenant Gallagher? They didn't use leaf blowers. This was a proper search. They used little shovels, little rakes, and sifting, literally sifting through the snow layer by layer. And by this time, the snow had fallen quite a lot. There was mounds of it where it had been ploughed, and there was a lot of snow. And they found 6 or 7 taillight pieces. Now, they found the taillight pieces at 5:45 to 5:50. So all this is happening in the same hour as Karen's Lexus gets to the Sallyport. Now, is it possible for pieces from the taillight to have been planted at 34 Fairview already, given that they weren't in possession of the Lexus until that afternoon? That's something that the defense are really going to have to work on. It's very possible for all of the rest of the pieces, because there was like 40 odd pieces found, to have been planted at a later date. But this initial search on the 29th that was happening at the same time that the Lexus was being impounded, are the jury actually going to believe that these few pieces, these 6 or 7 pieces that were found, had been planted? I think that's a stretch. I mean, I believe that the pieces, like the 40 odd pieces, I believe they were planted. I do. I really do. But is it possible for them to have planted a few? And the shoe. They also found the shoe that was missing. So I think it's a stretch to get the jury to believe that they were planted before this search. But that's down to the jury to decide. So listen.
Is the court's position today show these photographs?
Yes.
Could we get more of a close-up, Ms. Gill? Sir, can you describe what you're seeing here?
That's the sneaker we located up against the curb. You can see the snow in the background, and that's the flagpole in front of the house. You can see it's still snowing at this time.
Could we see 121, please? And sir, can you describe again what that is?
Just a close-up photo of the sneaker we located up against the curb.
Is that curb the black area to the right?
Correct, sir.
How high is that curb?
I'm not sure, sir.
Well, we know it's like 6 inches because this is the berm. I've never heard a curb called a berm before, but anyway. So this is a curb, and the sneaker is up against the curb. So it was under the snow that they've cleared away using proper means, not by leaf blowing it. So the jury have to believe, for them to believe that Karen Reid did not hit John O'Keefe, they have to believe that this had been planted in the snow, under the snow, at some point during either that morning or that afternoon. Now, remember, this shoe would have been, if John had died in the house and they found this shoe afterwards and they just chucked it out there, that's easily planted, easily, because anybody from 34 Fairview could have come out and just thrown that in, and it snowed over the top of it. So I've not got a problem with the shoe, but I do have a problem with the taillight pieces, because how did they manage to plant 6 or 7 taillight pieces under the snow before the car was actually impounded in the Sallyport? Now, there might be an answer for this. But I don't know what it is at this moment. Colin, look at him. Yeah, they're not allowed to bring Colin up, though, in this trial. They're not allowed to talk about him. They're allowed to talk about Higgins and Albert, but they're not allowed to talk about Colin. Why only one shoe? Because he had the other shoe on. He was wearing the other shoe. There was one shoe missing when he went to the hospital. So it could have fallen off when they put him, when the fight went on. Could have fallen off at any point, and they just put it out there. So the shoe I've not got a problem with. I do have a problem with the taillight, though. When did they put those 6 or 7 taillight pieces out there? That's something that has to be explained.
Several inches.
122, please. You described.
And I think this is very convincing for the jury. That's why I think that the prosecution, after Gallagher got off the stand, I think they had a really solid day. I think the prosecution won this day based on, thinking about it from a jury's perspective. And I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here, but I'm trying to put myself in the mind of a juror who knows nothing. And if you know nothing, this is actually quite convincing. Thought the taillight was just cracked. It was, but that actually, Karen says that she pulled some of the pieces out. So it had cracked, but it like some pieces had like fallen inside inside the housing. And she said she pulled some pieces out when she got to her parents' house. I think it was when she got to her parents' house. So is it possible if the taillight was cracked, some taillight pieces did fall out that morning when they were there looking for John? Is that possible? I don't know. But this is problematic. It's problematic for the defense.
The photograph with a sneaker with snow in it, is that photograph?
Yes, it is, sir.
Okay, thank you. You can take that down. That night, do you recall if there was any other pieces of taillight recovered?
I believe in total we located maybe 6 or 7 pieces of taillight.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do these pieces fit in the jigsaw puzzle of the taillight? Well, at trial 1, we heard that all the pieces fit, but there was just a few pieces missing. So they didn't find every single piece. So there were still some pieces missing. So did they say that they lost those on the road? Because maybe, like, if the taillight was cracked, that just the mere act of driving the vehicle might crack that taillight more. And pieces fell inside the housing. And maybe the pieces that they didn't find were the ones that Karen removed herself. But it's not the 40-odd pieces that were found later. That's not a problem in my mind, because it was once Canton had the possession of the Lexus, they could have effed about with that taillight and planted as many pieces as they wanted. My issue is the pieces that were found before there was time to plant those pieces. That's my problem.
Sir, I'm handing you 3 photographs.
Thank you.
Do you recognize the first photograph?
Yes, I do, sir.
And what's in that photograph?
It's a piece of red taillight that we located.
Could you look at the second photograph, please?
Yes, sir.
What do you see there?
It's the same piece of taillight that we recovered, just a close-up version. You can see the molding of an overturned shovel. That piece of taillight actually came up as one of our team members was shoveling. When he overturned his shovel, the piece of taillight was there, and you can see the actual molding from his shovel.
And the third photograph?
That is another piece of taillight that we located at ground level.
A different piece.
Yes, sir.
Let's stick with photographs 1 and 2. Photographs 1 and 2 is close up and a further view of a piece of taillight. Are those fair and accurate depictions? Is that piece appeared that night?
Yes, they are, sir.
All right, we'll introduce 2 photographs of evidence.
Thank you. He wants a close-up, right?
Yeah, Your Honor.
75K.
So when these items were found, did you examine or study the depth of those items when they were found?
I did not, sir. Gave them a glance when our team members told us we found something, and then Lieutenant Tully took over documentation. I returned to my place, on our line.
So we don't know what depth they were found in. That's crucial, because these taillight pieces had to have been found on the ground. If they were found in the snow, then they've been planted, because we know from the meteorologist that there was only a dusting of snow at 12:30. What was it he said? Enough snow to track a cat. I've never heard that saying before. But basically, you've got a little white film, so you'll be able to see little paw prints from a cat. But Ryan Nagel and what's her name, Heather. I called her Hannah yesterday, but Heather Maxim. They both said that you could still see the grass. Like, yes, it was snowing; it had just started sticking, but you could still see the grass. So, if John O'Keefe was knocked over at 12:32 and the taillight pieces went all over the place, they were at ground level. 100%, they were at ground level. If they were found in the snow, then they have somehow been planted. Somehow. I don't know how in the time, but somehow they had been. So I want to know where they found at ground level, and he does not know. That's a problem. He personally did not find them, though. So we need to get the person who actually found the first 6 or 7 pieces on the stand. He didn't find these pieces.
You know if any of the items were touching the ground or were they on snow?
A couple of the pieces were found at ground level, touching the asphalt.
Okay, so a couple of pieces were. Well, okay. All of them should have been. All of them should have been. I don't understand. Unless there was pieces in the road, and when the plough went by, the plough moved them. I guess you could argue that. But
And you said there was another item found that we just talked about? A separate piece of taillight?
Yes, that photo you showed me was a separate piece of the taillight we located, sir.
Any approach?
Yes.
they did a GPS. Yes, they did. But it's only a GPS on where it was found. What I'm saying is they could argue that some of the pieces were in the snow because they were pieces that were in the road. And then when the plough went by overnight, it's moved those pieces to the side and bunched them in with a whole bunch of snow. That's an argument that could be made. I'm not sure they're going to make the argument. I'm not sure anybody's made that argument. I'm just saying that's the only way that the taillight pieces could have got inside the snow. They should all be at ground level. The only way is if a plough was able to move them like to the side when it went through in the middle of the night. Otherwise, they all had to be at ground level, but the GPS tags were put on them all when they were found. So it's the locations where they were found, not the locations where they would have fallen if indeed they did fall off Karen's car during a collision.
Showing you two photographs. Could you look at the first one?
That's what he seems to be saying, yeah. That's two. He said 2 pieces were found at ground level, the others were in the snow. And then touching the asphalt, so in the road. Yeah. Touching the asphalt, so in the road. So how did the taillight pieces get in the road? Like, wouldn't they fling off like in loads of directions? Because if they were in the road, then it's perfectly conceivable that the cracked taillight that Karen had when she hit John's car at Meadows, that crack, like some pieces fell off when they were there. And maybe some pieces fell off on the road at the journey there. But we need to know exactly where these pieces were found in relation to the snow, the depths of the snow.
Photograph.
Yes, sir.
What do you see?
A piece of taillight at ground level.
And if you could look at the second photograph, what's that?
It's a close-up enhanced view of that same piece of taillight.
So it's just a different view of the same piece of taillight?
Correct, sir.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction as that piece of taillight appeared that night?
Yes, it is, sir.
I'll move these two into evidence. One photograph and the second is a closer up view. No objection.
Okay.
That's very true also, Kimberly. A plough would have seen John. I absolutely agree.
76 and 76A.
While you were conducting the search, did anybody but your team, Trooper Tully, the person who's documenting the evidence, did you see any other people who were not law enforcement in the area?
At some point during our search, the media arrived on scene, began filming us or taking photos.
Was there anybody from your department or a different department that was managing the crowd?
No, there were members with Lieutenant Tully that I believe were not state police members, but I wouldn't know how to characterize what their job description was, sir.
At any time, did...
So there's an issue here. There's Lieutenant Tully. There's a bunch of other law enforcement people that he doesn't know. They're watching them. So remember, this is in a blizzard. And they've managed to get together 7 people who've got the expertise to do this search. And one of them, they originally wanted 8, but one of them couldn't get there because he couldn't get the snow off his drive. So all of these other people just turned up to watch in the middle of a blizzard. Why? Why was it that important for all those other people? Like Tully and all of these bunch of others. We know Proctor wasn't there because Proctor was doing shady things in the Sallyport at that time with Karen Reid's Lexus. We know this. The jury doesn't know this yet, but we know this from trial 1. So I'm going to leave it there because I think we've got a lot more thinking about this to do. And I think there's going to be possibly more testimony that makes it make more sense. But the question that I went away from, and there is a little bit of cross-examination after this, and then is he done at the end of today? I think he's done. Hold on.
Could not provide you a photograph at, let's call it 5:50 p.m.
And Alan Jackson made some solid points in cross-examination, because it comes out that these taillight pieces were found between 4:45 and 4:50. So the Lexus had got to the Sallyport 5:35, and then the pieces were found between 4:45 and 4:50. So is there enough time for somebody to grab pieces from the Sallyport and then get them to the scene and then hide them? No, I don't think there is, because there was media there. There was a bunch of people there. So if those taillight pieces, those first 6 taillight pieces were planted, they had to have been planted earlier on in the day. So I think we need to, but my by the end of yesterday, my overarching concern was the defence really has to be able to solidly explain how those first 6 taillight pieces were found, got there. How did they get there?
Did he tell you
What
that
has this guy done? I don't remember if this guy's done or not.
the vehicle had actually been secured at Canton PD about 1.5 miles away at 5:35 p.m.?
No, he did not say that, sir.
Did you know through any other means that that vehicle was just 1.5 miles away at 5:35 p.m. before you ever found the first piece of taillight? Did you know that?
I did not know what time it arrived, sir.
Thank you.
Do you know what time Trooper Tully told you he did not have a photograph?
It was sometime after we found the first piece, sir, so sometime after 5:45, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
That's all I have.
All right, Lieutenant, you are all set, sir.
All right, he's all set. He's all set. So we're done with him. So a fresh new witness starting in less than 50 minutes. Less than 50 minutes time. So I'm going to leave it there. I've gone a little bit over. I'm trying to keep these to an hour so that they're watchable on the replay. But not a lot of people are watching on the replay, so there's that. But we got day 11 coming up very soon in about 47 minutes. So we got a fresh witness. I don't know who's coming up. Hank Brennan is doing these in an order that is known only to him. He's got people out of order and all sorts of things, but I'm sure there's method in his madness as to how he's ordered all these different witnesses. He's definitely much more of a tactician than Lally was. He's a much better lawyer than Lally was, and that's a problem because the defense needs all the help they can get. It's a retrial. There's always an advantage for the prosecution at a retrial, and Hank Brennan is a way better lawyer, way better tactician than Lally could ever be. So let's see what today brings. So thank you all for joining me. I will be back tomorrow with the trial recap of day 11. So look out for that. And yeah, I'll see you soon. Thanks, mods, as always. And enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to go and sit in my back garden now. Bye, guys.